Hi there, and welcome to StoryStream, the VPL Storytime for adults. My name is Jonna, and I'm coming to you today from the Indigenous Collection, which is located inside the Central Library at 350 West Georgia Street. Today's very special episode was shot on location at Weyahwachin, which is located on the lands of the Tsleil-Waututh people, in a place that is known to settlers as Deep Cove in North Vancouver. Today, we're going to tell you all about the Indigenous Storyteller in Residence, Les George. The VPL Indigenous Storyteller in Residence program was created in 2008 in recognition of Indigenous peoples in Canada and the importance of storytelling as a way to learn about and from Indigenous communities in Vancouver. Through the Storyteller in Residence, we seek to honor Indigenous cultures and to promote intercultural understanding and communication. Storytelling can happen through a variety of mediums and narrative practices, and therefore, this residency is open to all Indigenous storytellers who wish to share their knowledge and history. VPL recognizes that sincere action to decolonize our practices and to center Indigenous knowledge systems and cultural practices is needed. The Indigenous Storyteller in Residence program is essential to the library's public programming. Les George is a member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation, where he lives on the north shore of Burrard Inlet. He is the grandson of late Tsleil-Waututh chief Dan George and is connected through family to the Squamish and the Musqueam nations. For 23 years, Les George was a First Nations support worker with the North Vancouver School District, working closely with at-risk youth and those with special needs. He shared stories, drumming, songs, and held restorative justice circles with students. Les also works for Takaya Tours, the premier First Nation-owned ecotourism venture in the Lower Mainland. As a guide, he keeps groups safe as they paddle Burrard Inlet and Indian Arm in replica ocean-going canoes or sea kayaks, all while sharing Tsleil-Waututh songs, legends, and information about village sites. Without further ado, please enjoy this story from Les.
Part of our traditions and is oral storytelling. As you can see, I don't have a book, and part of our storytelling is for lessons, is for teachings, and also to recognize our ones that have passed on into what I call the spirit world. And the one I'd like to tell you today is about one of our great warriors, one of our great men, became a great chief. His name was Watsik. Watsik, he had a really big heart, and he cared for everybody, took care of everybody, and he was keeper of our lands. He was to Tsleil-Waututh, and he took care of everybody, all the way down to the babies. If there was ever a baby crying, he would pick the baby up, and the baby would stop crying. If he ever came across munmuns, which is children in Squamish language, they would come running up to him, and he would embrace them and give them a pat on the head or rub their back. And they would be happy around him. They'd feel safe. And the teenagers, he would give them advice and teachings, and they would listen to him. And the young adults and adults would turn to him for advice. And he would give them the teachings and the protocols, and they would listen. And the elders, even though he had the respect for the elders, he gave the utmost respect, because those are our strong teachings, to take care of our elders. He would take care of them, but the elders would also turn to him for advice. And on days like today, he would come out and he'd give thanks for the sun. On days like a couple of weeks ago when we had the rainstorms, he would be thankful for the rain. And like a few months ago when we had snow, he would even come out and give thanks for the snow. He'd always share a song. He'd be like, Wanina, Wanina, hai, hai, Wanina, hai, hai, hai. And he would do that every day, whatever kind of day it was. That's who Watsik was. Now Watsik, he had these powers, these special kind of powers that none of us others had. And that was the power of communication. I don't mean communicating like I'm talking to you guys right now, I mean, communication like with the four-leggeds, like the wolf, the deer, the bear, the elk. And what I mean by that, he would be walking along trails and he would come across a creek. And there would be a deer there having water early in the morning. And the deer would be startled. And Watsik would get a little bit startled too at first. But then he would see, and if it had horns, he would say, "Good morning, brother." And if it didn't have horns, he'd say, "Good morning, sister." And they would both just go back to relaxing. And Watsik would carry on his walk and the deer would carry on drinking. If they were walking trails that go parallel, there'd be another four-legged, a bear. And Watsik would see the bear and the bear would turn and see him. But they both knew that they weren't there to harm each other. And they both carry on their ways. That's who Watsik was. And those powers went beyond that. He even had those powers with the winged ones, the eagles, the ravens, all the way down to the little chickadees that fly around and the little hummingbirds. They would fly around him. Hummingbirds would fly around him and he would say good morning to them. Eagles would soar above him. And he would say hello to them. Little chickadees would almost land on his shoulder. That's who Watsik was. He had a big heart. He had a big mind. And those powers even carried into the water. He had the powers with the finned ones. The salmon, the seals, the yote-yotes. Yote-yotes in Squamish language is killer whale. And if we were all Tsleil-Wautuths and we were paddling out in these waters, we'd be paddling and we'd look at Watsik and there would be salmon splashing around him. And he would be saying hello to them. And they wouldn't be splashing around us. There'd be seals that would pop their heads up right beside them where he could almost pet them. And that's who Watsik was. Those were his powers. But with those powers came responsibility. And he knew that. And he knew what he had to do. When he would see certain birds throughout the season, he knew that there was going to be berries and certain other veggies and plants that would be coming that we would need to gather. And he would let all the other Tsleil-Wautuths know that it's time to go get ready to go gather these. And they knew Watsik's powers and they'd be like, okay, so they'd start preparing to go gather medicines or harvest berries. So they knew when Watsik would say that he would do that, they would listen to his words. And that carried on into the water here. With those powers in the water, he knew when the salmon was coming. Now to Tsleil-Waututh, they lived on 85 to 90% salmon. That was our diet. So we relied on the salmon a lot. And if we were in these waters and we keep paddling out this way, east, another 28 to 30 kilometers, we'll get to one of our village sites in Tsleil-Waututh. In Tsleil-Waututh. And that's our salmon village. Now I've been there myself a few times and I've been there in the summer on beautiful days like today. And the water's so clear and so refreshing, you can see all the way down to the bottom. But I've also been there during salmon season, and it's as black as my shorts. Because there's so many salmon in that water that if you walk almost some parts of the river are like from me to you away, and if the salmon weren't so slippery, we could walk across their backs. So Watsik, he would knew when the salmon were coming. And he would let all the other Tsleil-Wautuths know on both sides of the inlet that the salmon are coming. Get in your canoe. Let's head up there. Go grab your nets. It's time to head up there. Get your spears. It's time to head up to Tsleil-Waututh. And they would listen to him. They would listen to his words. And they would. Now where we are is Weyawachin, which means faces the wind, our summer village here. Now Watsik, this is one of the great points. So he would come down here. And he would, when you look west, you can see all the way downtown. You can see Second Narrows Bridge. You can see pretty far down on the North Shore. So he would sit here. And if you look east, you can see pretty far. You can see into that bay, Rocky Point in Port Moody. We had village sites down there. And we had people living in the Vancouver area. Alan, up to Tsleil-Waututh, you would have to go this way. So he'd come sit down here with his drum. He would sit here for hours, sometimes days. And when you go paddling by with your family, he would share a song with you. Wanina, Wanihina hai hai, wanihina hai hai, wanihina hai. And when he would sing that, he would be paddling by, and we would all give a wave to Watsik. Now Watsik, he would always make sure that everybody got up there. And he would wait for the last Sleighwat to go by. Then he would make his way up there in his canoe. Now when he got up there were these two boys. And they seen all the salmon in the river. And they were a little bit curious. And they're looking at the salmon, and they're grabbing rocks the size of their hand. They were throwing them into the river and smashing these salmon dead. They were grabbing boulders enough for two hands, throwing them in the river, crushing the salmon, or knocking them out onto the land, killing them. Now Watsik seen this, and he came to them. He's like, boys, these aren't our teachings. These aren't our ways. This isn't how we treat the salmon. And the boys kind of just giggled and kind of just shrugged him off and ran off down the trail. Now Watsik, he was always one of the first ones awake. He always was the first one awake. And the next morning he awoke, and instead of getting in his canoe, he took a walk down the trail to look for any remaining Sleighwats. Now when he started making his way back, the same two boys, they came down they woke up and they seen Watsik's canoe. And when they seen his canoe, they thought he was still sleeping. So they broke branches from the trees, and they came down and they looked at the salmon. And one boy, he started gulping them out of the water, knocking the salmon. The other boy, he was scooping them out of the water and baseball batting them out of the park. Now Watsik, he told them, I told you boys, this isn't how we treat the salmon. These aren't our teachings. These aren't our ways. So Watsik, our salmon season is September, October, and early November. And these waters, they never change temperature. If anything, they get colder. So he walked into the water waist high. He started singing, Wanina, 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 Wanina. And by the time Watsik finished singing his song, the salmon had left the river and swam back into the saltwater. Because in Lewatosh is where the fresh water meets the saltwater. And they took off out to the saltwater. And when the rest of the Sleighwats came down with all their fishing gear, they seen the river was all clear. Who Watsik was. And they knew his powers. And they turned to Watsik and they said, why? Why'd you make the salmon leave? And Watsik told them what these boys had been doing. And he said, I didn't tell the salmon to leave. I told them what these two boys were doing. And they left on their own. Now Watsik, when you go that way, another 28 kilometers, that's where you can see the salmon, the bubbles, you could see the bubbles. So in my community, in my village, and I've been to a lot of villages in Canada and even some down the States, and not only First Nations villages, other communities throughout the Lower Mainland, throughout Canada, we all have a same saying. And that is, it takes a whole village or a whole community to raise a child. So all these Sleighwat families, they gathered these boys and they told them the importance of the salmon. They told them how much of a diet it was for us and how we need to get through the winter with them. And we also have another saying, and these boys got it in their heart and in their mind. And we have a word for that, not samat. Not samat is one heart, one mind. And these boys got it. So that night in the big house, and there's a really big house up there. I've been there and I've seen the markings of the big house. And it's very wide and it's very long. And that night, these boys needed to stand up in front of everybody and say what was on their mind and what was in their heart. Now they were scared They were nervous. They had mixed feelings, but they knew in their heart that they needed to stand up. And they stood up. And they said, we're sorry for what we've done. We know what we have done is wrong, and we won't let it happen again. And members from each Tsleil-Waututh family stood up. They said, it's not us you need to apologize to. And they knew who Wautuck was too. And they turned to Wautuck. We're sorry for what we've done, and we won't let it happen again. And Wautuck told them, it's not me you need to apologize to. So those boys, they knew in their heart and their mind, they knew who they needed to apologize to. And that next morning, they awoke before Wautuck, and they went down to that river, and they walked into that river waist deep. They started singing this song. Wanina, wanina, hai, hai. Wanihina, hai, hai. Wanihina, hai, hai. Hai, hai. And by the time those boys finished singing their song, the salmon had swam back up into the river, and the rest of the Tsleil-Wautuths got their harvest for the winter time. Oh, Siam, I thank you for listening to my story. Oh, Siam.